Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. Micky Carre, introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Micky Carre.
All right. So what do you like? Long walks on the beach, pina coladas in the rain?
Nope,
I don't know.
the sand gets all up in my feet and everything. Pina coladas are great. I like a good ripe banana. I actually just went to, I just had a date tonight, which was great. I went to a French restaurant. That was wonderful. I like cars. I like vintage sports cars, Formula One racing, and woodworking.
And what kind of woodworking do you do?
Guitars. Actually, I've built about 20 electric guitars from scratch. It was just a random hobby I picked up in the Army because they had a wood shop there, and I bought some lumber, and I always wanted to build a guitar, and I did it.
Cool.
Yeah.
I did frame carpentry to pay for schooling, but that's not like requiring a lot of skill. Can you hammer? Can you nail? Can you use something to keep it straight? Like
you got to get boxes right, though. I can build a guitar, but I can't build a box that isn't like twisted.
Yeah, that is the trick, and part of that is the carving on the inside, so they angle into each other. Mm-hmm. And then some of these the older types that do it a lot, they can tongue and groove that crap on the fly, and I'm like, mm-hmm. I don't have those skills.
Yeah.
Woodworking is not a useful one. I'm realizing as I get older and as I don't want to have to pay everybody to do everything, that I'm learning all the things my dad tried to teach me when I was little and I had no interest in.
Yeah.
Well, son of a bitch, he was right. It's kind of the way of the world, right? The older you get, the smarter your parents become.
Yeah, I find myself telling my 3-year-old, look with your eyes, not your hands. And I'm like, oh, God, that's what my parents used to say. Oh, man.
I remember the first time you as a parent, you have that moment where like, oh, crap, you made me sound like my father.
Yeah.
Like there's that light shed moment.
Good times.
All right. So the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we found them. So we found him through his publisher. He publishes his audiobook side of things for this book with Royal Guard Publishing. And since we had so much fun with Jessica when she came on to pimp her small press, well, I don't know really you could call it small. They're kind of massive at this point.
They're expanding at a very rapid rate. They treat authors very well. They like it's a good deal. Like they're doing very well and they're expanding quickly and they're really earning it, if that's the right way to say it. They earn it, They deserve it. They're great.
And we found Royal Guard through HP Hollow's other alternative pen name, HP or Eddie Sky. So that's how we got to this guy, and it was fun. We were in the pre-show while we were setting everything up, talking about our time in the Army and just having a whole lot of fun. But before we get too deep into this interview, we do have to ask you the religion question. So are you ready for this?
I'm ready. I practice in front of the mirror thrice.
Thrice. Outstanding. All right. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Star Wars, but only the original trilogy, and preferably the second, third. I guess that would be like the 5th and 6th episodes.
Yeah.
The first one was okay, but it was a little. They didn't know there was going to be sequels. It really came into play with The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I like to forget that episodes 1 through 3 existed, and then the recent 7, 8, 9 were money grabs. I'm sorry, they were money grabs. I do enjoy Firefly, and I like a lot of things about Star Trek, but I don't like J.J. Abrams and the recent ones with him. I don't like that, but I like the core philosophies and the things about Star Trek. I'm a big fan of that.
I like Star Trek, a lot of the ideas. My problem with Star Trek is it's so utopian, and I'm just like, have you met humans?
Yeah, it's very foreign because I got my start writing cyberpunk, and especially gritty cyberpunk. So I learned about that. I was like, wait, a healthy, functional society? Like, what would I even write about?
And the idea that we would just evolve past money, like people do things because it benefits them.
And like everyone's happy and you're nice to each other and you take care of each other. It does sound cool, but people are grimy and gritty.
Yes. So that's why it never really spoke to me. Not that I hate it. I'll sit down and watch it. I like the new Star Trek movies that came out with the younger actor. I can't remember his name now.
I know you're talking
Pines, Chris Pines, I think.
Yeah. I like the stories. I just don't like J.J. Abrams' directing style, and I don't like how he'll completely like change the plot and the script and everything just to like show off some visual effects for one thing. It's like, come on. I'm picky though. I'm critical and I'm picky. So
I understand. Some people are more of a filmophile than I am. Like it's pretty. I like it. Right. Like other people are like, no, we're going to look at the shading and the angles and the camera panning, and that is just not me.
I used my GI Bill for a lot of fun stuff, including film school. So it gave me a rich appreciation of things, and I really enjoyed like Scorsese films, and stuff like that. I stuff that I would not have looked at before. So, in fact, I would love to do like a fantasy version of the film The Departed.
Okay.
Or so. But there's not really a way to work that into Harem Lit, because that's definitely not what I would call a happy ending. But I love the movie. It goes through so many twists and turns, and like I love the movie. And I think doing that, in a fantasy style would be super awesome. But it would have to be just traditional fantasy.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah. So, do you like the Grimdark then?
I do. I'm a big fan of Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy. It's one of my favorites. In fact, my main character in my series, that book one comes out, August 5th, the Dragon Riders of Etrea. The main character was heavily influenced by what's his name, Logan Ninefingers, the Bloody Nine, in Joe Abercrombie's books. Of course, his temper is completely different. It involves other things that I can't give away. Read the book. But that was one of the things that led me to that. I wanted to write the kind of Conan Barbarian style. A guy with problems, and then later you learn why he has these problems, and it's fascinating. And the story just kind of wrote itself.
I read the first one, and I couldn't keep going. I didn't like anybody in the book. Like I hated all the characters, the good guys, the bad guys. I hated them all.
That was one of the things. The good guys aren't necessarily good guys. The Dog Man was, I think, one of the only true good guys. But yeah, the main guy, he's got problems. The Bloody Nine, Logan Ninefingers, he means to be a good guy, but then he goes in these barbarian rages and like friendly fire all over the place, and he's just like chopping people down. And he comes to, and he's like, "Oh God, I did it again."
Yeah, I did like the way they approached magic. It had shades of the Bulgarian with David Eddings in it for the magic style.
And it was like a minor thing. Like the magic was something very powerful and mystical and all that, but it wasn't like I cast with my wand. It was like a very like special thing that only came out every once in a while. So
yeah, from a storytelling perspective, he did less is more with the magic. But I did like the way he did it, like when they destroyed the tower in that scene. That was really well done. For me, it's always about the characters, and if I'm not sold on the characters, like I don't need it to be like, I don't mind grimdark as far as setting goes. I just need it to be a hopeful ending. I need that there be a light at the end of the tunnel that isn't a train that's about to run me over.
So I will say this: if you make it through the trilogy, the final fight is very, very good. I would say inspirational for people that like write battle scenes and stuff like that. It's just a duel, but it's so good.
Are you talking about the duel in the arena?
Just in a circle of guys with shields.
Oh, there was one the arena one was book one.
This is the end of book 3, the end of the trilogy. Yeah, and there's hints, and they show the main villain and everything. Fenris the Fear, he's like 9 feet tall and wearing half armor and half tattoos. They like show little glimpses of him all throughout the trilogy, and he's always, you just see him like one sentence, and he's terrifying. And he does a good job of really building him up until at the end it's like, oh, I got to fight this guy. That's not good.
Yeah, like you said, it wasn't.
Oh, he's not for everyone. Totally. Yeah.
No, it's not even the writing, because sometimes if it's just a bad writing, do you like the plot? This one, I mean, clearly Abercrombie's got skills. I just couldn't get into the characters. So
totally understand.
All right, so on the because we're polytheistic here at the Blasters Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia.
Actually, never read Chronicles of Narnia. Don't hold it against me. Sorry. I started reading Game of Thrones. I finished book 1, washed my hands. Those books are grimy. And then I stopped because of Wheel of Time, actually. I'll explain that in a second. I didn't want to start a series and then have to wait on it to be finished, you know? And
Right.
that was, God, I was still in the Army. Let's see, I was in Maryland. That was 2013 when I read Game of Thrones, if I remember correctly. And I stopped. I just started book 2, and then I stopped. I said, nope, I'm going to wait. So what happened with Wheel of Time, which is my choice, Wheel of Time, I grew up with that series. I started reading book 1 in 9th grade, so 1996, when the book was still pretty new. And when I started reading the series, it was only 5 books out. So I had to wait. You know, every time a book came out, I would reread the series and then read the new one. Another book, reread the whole series, read the new one. So I definitely, I can say I kind of grew up with Wheel of Time, because that was since I was, 13 or so until I was well into my 20s when Brandon Sanderson finished it. And I think there are a lot of really good world builders out there, but I have never before seen someone that has done it to the sheer extent of Mr. James Oliver Rigney, Robert Jordan. Each individual nation, even just in passing, they've got their own flag, their own politics, their own economy. Like everything was so fleshed out that, like, when you read it, and sometimes, like, I think book 9, it is a little bit of a slog, but on your 6th or 7th rereading, it really does get better. You really feel like immersed in this world that he created, because there are so many rich details, and that's something that has influenced my writing. In fact, the entire reason I started writing fantasy is directly because of Robert Jordan. I wanted to write stories like that. So thanks, but I try to put I find it's very difficult to put that much detail into my writing without it just being like over the top, and I'm starting every single sentence with the same word. I'm like, oh God, I can't do this. I'm not a good enough author to do that. But he could just do a whole page describing a room, and it was fascinating. Like, wow, I can really picture this room in my mind. And I do have a few things that I type, a few little phrases and stuff that I definitely get from him. So
did you like the film adaptation that HBO, or was it HBO or Prime? I don't remember. That did the Wheel of Time series.
Hold on, I got to take a deep breath. My fight or flight response just activated. No, I very much did not like the Amazon's adaptation. If they took the story and changed some, because let's be honest, it's an enormous story, and there's no real way to accurately do it in 8 seasons, especially only doing 8 episodes per season, which I think was a big mistake. It should have been 10 or 12. Even still, even with that, you got to cut a lot of stuff out. But I feel like, what's his name? Rafe Judkins. He's essentially taking the Wheel of Time, twisting it to be what he wants it to be, and inserting his own story / narrative in there, which I'm not necessarily against the things that he's wanting to put in there. I'm not against that. Like, a lot of LGBT stuff and like that. I'm not against that at all. But like, tell the story. If you want to tell your story, write your own book. Like, this is something I've loved since childhood. I just want to see this. And like, I think he got most of the characters very wrong. Very wrong. Even little things like their height is all wrong. Lan's supposed to have blue eyes. Actually, if you read Robert Jordan's early Conan books, he wrote Conan the Barbarian, 6 books, 7 if you count the Conan the Destroyer movie adaptation. Lan was based on Conan the Barbarian. He has the same haircut, the same blue eyes. He's the same size. He's the same height, the same demeanors. In one of them, he wears in Wheel of Time, it's called the Hidori, the headband. Like, and then, no disrespect to the actor, Daniel Kim, I think, that played Lan. But I mean, he looked like a tacky 2-bit Hollywood samurai, and he's like 6'1". And if you read, even with interviews with Robert Jordan, Lan was like 6'6" or 6'7". He was enormous, because Rand was 6'4", 6'5", and Lan was notably taller than him. Even a little thing like that, I know I'm nitpicking, but there are just so many things that were wrong. And then he's killing off these people, and then everything is wrong. The only thing I think he did a pretty good job on was oh wow, I've actually never said this out loud. This is going to feel weird. The Tuatha and Mier, the traveling people. Did I say that right? The traveling folk. The Tinkers. I think he did a pretty good job on them. The slight kind of gypsy. Sorry, I think that's not an okay word to say. Romani style people and the kind of hippie-ish vibe, but making it like all nature and stuff. I think he did a really good job with that. But the rest, so many things were wrong for no reason. The Trollocs attack, the two rivers, and like Moraine is pulling, she's tearing a building down so she can throw the bricks at these guys, which is nothing like the book. Like, I'm sorry, I'm going to ramble for an hour. I see Rotten Tomatoes just because of that series. So I could leave like an entire novel of like a 0% review. I hated it so much. I hate watched about 10 minutes of season 2 and I couldn't do it. It was so bad.
I watched the first season and then we canceled Prime, so I didn't keep watching, but I had 2 complaints with it, and I've never read the books. I've tried to read Robert Jordan. I just couldn't get into it.
They're very long and you got to be kind of patient.
But my 2 problems with it is, one, it did feel like the way they told the story, like the author hated men. And I called my buddy who's a huge Robert Jordan fan, and he's read all the books, and he did recently had been on a podcast where they did a read through. I'm like, what's going on? And he goes, no, it's not that Robert Jordan hated men. And he goes to explain the way the magic got corrupted and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, they just did such a bad job of explaining the magic because, obviously there's gendered politics in the movie or in the universe, but it's, dependent on where they're from kind of thing, which is normal.
I mean, the most powerful people in the world are all women. And then the hero, the savior, is a man, which is terrifying because he's a man that knows magic, which means he's destined to go insane and kill everyone around him. Oh, but he's also the strongest guy that's like ever been born. And his last incarnation, like created a mountain when he died because he was so, hey. Sorry, my cat was sharpening her claws on the couch.
But yeah, so like
terrifying figure, but he has to live. So you have definitely power balances and gender balances and stuff. But in the books, it's a very interesting way versus in the show. Yeah, it's very ham-fisted and like, dude, what are you doing?
My other problem with this one was the costuming. I guess we're spoiled because it's that if you were a freshman in 96, it means you're class 2000, just like I was. So we're the same age. So I grew up and I saw Lord of the Rings in that epic costuming on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go from that 20 years ago to what we saw, which was like bad Halloween store costuming?
And then you read how much money they spent on that garbage, and it's
between Wheel of Time, the series, and the new Lord of the Rings Amazon did with the costuming. I'm like this is just bad. Like I could see a high school you would forgive it if it's some high school theater production. I will give them credit. Like, bro, you tried, but this is Hollywood. Standards are a little different.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so for me, the costuming was just so laughably bad.
And they spent, millions of dollars. Because reportedly, Jeff Bezos himself wanted this because he wanted his own Game of Thrones. And that's why they got this. And he was the one that was like, yeah, do this. And so, God, season 1, they spent some astronomical figure, like $130 million or something on it.
They got played by someone who lied on their resume.
Rafe Judkins. If I did Christmas cards, he would not be on my list.
Yeah, you feel about him like I do about the lady that canceled Firefly.
Yeah, I liked Firefly enough where there should have been a second season.
So, all right. So, with that, one of the crying shames of adulthood is they stop asking us this question. So, I do have to ask you, sir, what's your favorite dinosaur?
The Diplodocus, specifically because for like 5 years, I said the name in my head, and it wasn't until the day I said it out loud, and I call it a Diplodocus. And I was looked at like the biggest idiot in the world. They're like, what? You mean a Diplodocus? I was like, oh. So that one has always stuck in my mind, the Diplodocus.
Okay. That's a good reason to get it wrong, though.
They're all pretty fascinating, though. Actually, the local zoo, I took my son to the local zoo the other weekend, and they had this big, what do you call them? Big, like kind of statues of figures, I guess, of dinosaurs, and they move and stuff. And he's just below 3 years old, so he was just loving it. everyone loves the T-Rex. There's another one, I forget the name, that its name is like Latin for good mother or something like that. It's kind of Stegosaurus-y, but like more turtley. That's a horrible description. But there's a lot of neat ones. Oh, there's here. Okay, so here's one. If I want a better answer than just the name, so I cannot remember the name of this one, and I will apologize for that because I know that gets me some negative points. But it's one of the last of the pterodons, of which the pterodactyl was one, and it was one of the last of them, and it was enormous. And I'm talking like a 30-foot wingspan, giant flying lizard thing, and its beak face thing was like 8 feet long, this ridiculous head. And you see it, and it looks really awkward, so it's not quite terrifying, but it's like, what is that? That is enormous. And God, that is terrifying, actually.
The one that means good mother, I did a quick Google search while you were talking, is called Masaura. Maiasaura. Masaura.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that one.
And it looks like a lizard that's eating a lemon. Yeah. If you look up the picture.
Isn't that the one with like the bulbous tail, and it would just like beat the crap out of people with its tail, with her tail?
You're thinking about the Triceratops had the tail. The Stegosaurus had the spikes on the tail.
There's one with like a bony ball at the end of their tail.
Yeah, I think that's the Stegosaurus.
No, the Stegosaurus, I think, I don't know. It was one of those.
It's been a while since I looked.
There was a lot of dinosaurs.
I just think they're all cool. I don't necessarily think you need to have a favorite. Like every young boy at a certain point in time, you want to be a paleontologist because it's cool. Oh, yeah. And then you figure out if you want to be a paleontologist, you also have to want to be poor. That doesn't sound very fun. It's sort of like living in Florida if you're a marine biologist. You work at a bar.
It's one of those. I can verify that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where everyone dreams and there's just not enough jobs.
Yep.
So if you do want to study that, I salute you, but practice saying, do you want fries with that? All right. Because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. Coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
I don't think I have some. I was actually going to get up and get the box. Celestial Seasonings Lemon Zinger Tea. Sometimes with just a dash of raw wild honey, but I actually prefer that just hot water, nothing, just tea. In fact, make it like stronger, which is maybe not the word to use because it doesn't have any caffeine or anything. It's just an herbal tea, but like throw a few bags in there. It tastes amazing. It's got like lemongrass and rose hips, and it just tastes like pure happy. I grew up drinking that, and that is the tea that got me actually drinking tea. I grew up in the deep South, so like sweet tea was a thing, but let's be honest, that's not really tea. That's just like a soft drink basically because there's so much sugar in it.
It's sugar water with a hint of tea, and we call it table wine.
Yeah, 100%.
Where in the South were you from?
The Panhandle of Florida, Wakulla County, just south of Tallahassee. The part of Florida where we call it Floribama. And
I know you're at.
It says Florida isn't the South, you laugh in their face because, good Lord, especially North Florida is the South. Hardcore the South.
Okay. So we mentioned in the pre-show, obviously, that you served in the Army. So do you feel like your time in uniform affects the way you tell stories?
I think it does. And I think also some of like the self-discipline I learned helps because as an independent author, if you want to make a living, you can't really just like sit down and write a book and publish it. Most of us have the basic goal of 5,000 words a day. That's a lot of words. 5,000 words a day, 7 days a week is what I do. Although like the days that I have my son, I'm a dad. That's it. But when he lays down for a nap, I'm writing. When he goes to sleep at night, I go write. I try to get a couple thousand words in. And as long as it's a scene that is interesting and I can like really visualize it, they usually come pretty quickly. But I think that self-discipline of holding myself to, no, I need to write. I need to stop doing this, stop doing that. Let me do a couple 15-minute writing sprints. Let me sit down and do that. Just having some basic military experience, I think, helps with things that you might not always think about. Like, let's say our main character and his sidekick and one of the love interests or three, they're crossing an area on their horses. Okay, so they need food. What kind of food back then will last? You don't have MREs, so you do things like hardtack, dried meat. Okay, you need water. How much water can you carry? Or do you need some kind of magical source, which is something I've done because you got to carry a lot of water.
A lot of food too with a dragon.
Yeah. Well, dragons can hunt usually, so that kind of helps them. That's the I guess maybe that's cheating a little bit. I don't know, but you got this big burly 6.5 foot tall main character. He's going to need to eat. So, and then you look up okay, what did they eat? What was military food in the 1700s, in the 1600s, in the 1300s? You look up things like that, and then just a lot of modern military things where the shoot, move, communicate, which is a very valid thing, but you're shooting with rifles, and you've got field artillery versus not even swords. I mean, we use swords in fantasy books because they're highly romanticized and they're fascinating, but to be more accurate, you use spears and shields, maybe. That is what has won more battles than any other weapon probably in history, is the spear. That's been around since Macedonian times or before, 5000 BC. And I mean, the spear technically was still in use kind of even today, because when you put a bayonet on an M4, that basically becomes a spear. So the spear is eternal. And I think also being in the military helped me realize things like that. I want to be accurate, you're not going to spin your sword around and spin in a circle and no. And I've done knife training and stuff like that, and then a lot of combatives and stuff in the military and all. And I think that absolutely helps me write fight scenes, because what I think, got to be careful how I say this because I don't want to sound like I'm being rude or disrespecting any other authors. There also are some authors, especially some big name authors, and if you read the fight scenes, you can tell they watch a lot of anime and they've never been in a real fist fight. They've never gotten straight up just punched in the mouth and then had the grit to not go down, but go after the person. They've never experienced that, which is, it sucks. That's the thing about fighting. It's very glorified in books and in movies, but a real fight, it sucks.
And they're quicker than people think.
Yeah. Man, you get knocked in the face. That sucks. that is not fun. And if you make it through a hard punch in the face, well, I hope you can get the other guy and break his nose or something like that. Maybe trip him so he hits his head on the ground. And if so, you're probably good. And in 5 or 10 seconds, that fight is done. Long, drawn-out fights don't happen, especially if you have a knife. A knife fight is a brawl. You're both going to get stabbed. You're both going to bleed. You got to kill him before he kills you. Fighting is very gritty. It's very physical. It's not sword on sword on sword on sword. It's you can actually look up on YouTube. There was this Russian, it was what is it? The Russian UFC, except they're wearing armor, plate armor.
I've seen that.
Shield. Oh my God, those guys are nuts. They're they'd trip him and he's just taking his shield and slamming the rim of the shield into the guy's helmet over and over again until the guy finally taps. And I'm even through armor,
the ringing alone.
That was bad. But
he'll hear the sound of freedom for the rest of his life with the tendonitis. Yeah.
But that was,
and that's one of the things. Fighting. That's one of the things that people also get wrong about melee combat is, one, everything is too sanitary and clean. I'm anybody who's even just been camping knows dirt gets everywhere. You're filthy, stuff's under your nails. You don't just suddenly, take a quick bath and throw a fancy dress on or tie or whatever and look like you're at the ball. You're still going to have dirt under your nails. You just, some of that dirty,
you stink. You're sweaty. You're uncomfortable.
And then the other part that they get wrong is when they do melee combat, everyone's oh, he's fighting him and he's fighting him, so I can fight him. And we're all just going to fight our one person at a time. I'm no, I'm sorry. If I walk by and you're fighting my guy, I'll stab you in the back and keep on going.
Me and my 3 friends with spears, we're all ganging up on you and we're going to win. you know.
And it's just they always do the one-on-one or the melee fights where, you know, everyone's honorable and standing in front of their opponent. And I'm sorry if I'm moving and I got an open second and you're standing there fighting my guy, I'm stabbing you in the side, because even if you're not fighting me, because them's the breaks.
Game of Thrones, the HBO show Game of Thrones, they did that when Jon Snow, he like had like a duel with who was it, Ramsay Bolton, like in the middle of like a giant like melee fight. They're like, ah, boom, 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 like, and there's like soldiers all around them, and like, really, I mean, I know Ramsay Bolton probably would have, you know, killed someone that interfered, but like, no one's just gonna be like, oh, here, hold on, you know, spear in the back, right. It's done. That is fighting. Fighting is not. It's not. I mean, now we have, you know, codes of conduct and stuff, but all throughout history, especially like medieval fighting, it was like you said, it stank. All those animals, they got a poo. You know, you don't die quickly. If you get a spear to the gut, you're out of the fight 99% of the time. You know, that is
gut wounds are a horrible way to go. Even still, if they don't get you to a medic and get you to somewhere where you can clean it, sepsis will kill you.
Yeah, that is bad. I try to put some of that realism into my fight scenes, which I think probably makes them grimy a little bit, you know, hopefully, I would say hopefully a little bit uncomfortable to read, because I want them to be, because real fighting is very uncomfortable. It sucks. It hurts. Even if you win, it hurts, you know, like, it's awful. Your adrenaline's going, you can't focus. So you're attacking this guy next to you, and 3 people like bum rush you, and like, you don't even see them. Like, there are so many just awful things about like a real fight.
And that's the other thing, is they ignore the value of body sizing when it comes to fighting. Like, you know, the tiny little nothing who's never trained suddenly is killing the, you know, 8 foot tall, 400-pound Goliath. And I'm
such a problem with that. Oh my God.
Like, it can be done. It can be done well if you compensate and acknowledge the elephant in the room, but you have to acknowledge it, right? Like, you know, if I'm fighting you and I'm smaller, I have to use a different tactic. I have to hit and run. I have to be able to dodge, and I have to end it quickly, because he only has to get lucky once.
Yeah. And that's a very important thing that I put in there, because I'm a big fan of my main character being very much an everyman. You know, he's not.
Yeah, I like that.
6'4" and muscular and handsome. He's like average Joe. He's 5'9", works a job he may or may not like. You know, he goes to the gym here and there. So, I mean, he's the hero. He needs to be in decent shape. He may have done a quick stint in the army, but he's really just like a regular dude that gets put in this situation where he has, you know, the mental fortitude, the grit to push himself when other people would have just been like, I can't take this. And he becomes heroic. He's not born heroic. He becomes heroic through the strength of his mind, through the strength of his willpower, instead of like, I gained 30 levels and I cast, you know, fireball, what is it, magic missile against the darkness. Like, no, like, I like the story of the everyman using the strength of his willpower to conquer people, not, you know, 140-pound guy roundhouse kicking, you know, half Thor Bjornsson through a wall. Like, that is against the laws of physics. Stop.
And you don't get to be, and that's the other thing is, there's that expression, you know, you fear the old man in a young man's game, because you don't get to be the old man unless you know a thing or two about a thing or two.
Old men are in management positions and they all have arthritis.
But you don't live that long in a game where everyone dies young without having some knowledge still.
You do, you do. I can say as I'm 42, you know, but I feel like a million years old sometimes. And, you know, someone's in the army. Hi, kitty. My cat's meowing at me because she's hungry. Her bowl is full of food, but she wants different food. But there are definitely just going through that lifestyle, and, you know, you do it for 10 years, for 12 years, 11 years and 9 months, 27 days. And like, you do pick up toughness, you know, you'll find yourself in a different situation. And like, you know, I've always been a very laughing, kind of funny, nice guy. You know, I handle things with humor instead of getting aggressive. And like, I just live in a crappy apartment, and my ex, long story short, this horrible guy right across the hall, he, beat up his girlfriend and stuff like that. They fought all the time. He was slamming doors, and my ex, with our baby in her arm, went over there and pounded on the door and was like, "Will you please be quiet?" So he comes out almost butt naked and like threatens her. So me, little nice guy, and I'm only 5'7", I grabbed a baseball bat and I almost beat him to death. And he was terrified of me every time he saw me after that. And that, I think a lot of that was in the Army. They teach you, in situations where you have to act like that, you escalate in certain stages, but you do it explosively. You gain control of the situation, and you have to get on top of that situation and establish, essentially control of that. And okay, I am clearly the top dog in this situation. You are not, and I'm not going to let you, think you can get anything over on me. And you control the situation early, and people recognize that, and they back away very quick. Very quickly. It's funny.
Violence of action is the word we use in the infantry.
I still find it funny because, like, if you were to meet me, you would not think anything violent of me at all. I'm a little teddy bear that just likes a glass of wine and constant jokes, dad jokes, puns, any kind of joke. But like, yeah, I mean, the Army even did that to me. There's been a few situations. Actually, I was on a date tonight, and date went very well. And there was this kid, he was like 16. He pulled out his little vape, probably a weed vape, and was like, big deal. And this older guy said something really mean to him. Like, come on, dude, you're like 55 or something like that. Be the bigger man. Be like, hey, please don't do that. But he said something really mean to the kid. And like the kid's like mom and dad said, like, don't talk to my kid that way. And this guy said something mean to the kid's mom. And like, I don't know, I'm old school. You don't mess with someone's mom. That's just wrong. And so this kid did, and I applaud him because the old guy was a lot bigger than him. He stood up and he was like, let's go outside. I'll blank your blank, like he was standing up for his mom. And like, I was laughing with this woman I was on a date with, and we suddenly stopped and we're like, hold on, what? And then we hear this old guy like talking to his mom this way. And I felt that like kind of kick in. I was like, hold on, no. And I was like, don't you blanking dare talk to his mother that way. If you got a problem with him, tell him, be the bigger man, tell him in a mature voice, please don't do that. If there's a problem, call the management. You don't dare talk to someone's mother that way. How dare you? And had I not been in the Army, I probably wouldn't have done anything. But now I made this like a big old guy completely back down. So it definitely does change you in a person in ways that you don't always notice until something like that happens. Fun little story, I guess. It made for an interesting first date. I mean, at least she saw that I defended mom. Actually, she felt the same way. And she was like, I was ready to punch that guy. He was just a jerk, though. You're on mute.
Yeah, what a boomer moment. So it's one of those things that definitely changes you because, and I try to use this as an example so people can understand, because not everyone can join the military. Like sometimes they're just things happen in their life. They don't meet the standards, and I don't hold them like any less. But I mean, you get the same value out of contact sports. I remember when I played rugby in college. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I played contact sports. I went to Iraq, and I think I got as much out of playing rugby about being tough than as I did from the Army. And only because the first time I got hit, I kind of flinched. And I'm like, oh, F it, I'm going to pass the ball, right? Because you can pass it early behind you in rugby.
Rugby is not easy. That is a tough sport.
And it's in the metal cleats where they'll gouge your legs. And it's just my coach was like, oh, man, you're afraid to take the hit. And so the new rule, and this was my freshman year, right? Like,
those rugby players, I'd be afraid too.
Yeah. And so, my freshman year, the coach was like, you no longer are allowed to pass the ball ever. Oh. You will take the hit every time. And at that point in time, like by the time I was a junior, I probably could have passed the ball and he would have let it go. But it was a mark of pride. If I had it, I would never give it up ever. Yeah. You would have to scrum for it. And so I think the ability to look in the face and know I'm about to get hit. This is about to hurt, but I'm going to do it anyway. You get that from contact sports the same way you do in the military. That toughness that comes from doing physical things.
and it is a real, like, I was going to say a real tangible thing, but that's clearly the wrong word to use. You can't like feel it, but it is definitely a real thing that like you don't understand until you experience it. Like I said, I'm such a peaceful person. I mean, I'm a vegetarian. I'm like a cat guy. I'm a total softie. But like, I will go nuts on someone for messing with my family, or like this guy disrespecting this kid's mom, disrespecting he tried to walk out without pain. Like he was being rude to everyone. Like the guy was just a jerk. And I had some words.
So what you're saying is you're one man bun away from being a hippie.
Yeah. I mean, if I still had hair, I actually used to have shoulder length hair, but I had surgery on my head. So they got to shave your head for that. The doctor cut it open. He tried to find a brain. He couldn't find anything. He dug around for a while. I told him, at least put some bubble wrap in there. So I got something. So, I mean, that helped. But I got a couple fun scars on my head now and short hair, which I'm a long-haired person. But yeah, even me, such a non-violent person. If you showed me a YouTube video of someone breaking their finger, I would turn away. I hate seeing that. But like the toughness that I learned, like in the Army, like I will go nuts on someone for the right thing like that. And I will not back down. If they're twice my size, well, I guess I'm getting hurt, but I'm hurting them with me, like, and that is a thing.
And that mentality though, that willingness to get, I remember the first time I went out as leave as a young private, and our squad leader was like, you're going out in buddy teams. If everybody comes back and they got their ass kicked in a bar fight, I'm not telling you to get in a bar fight, but if you're the only one coming home with no bruises, you either had to be Jackie F. and Chan or we got problems because you stick up for your own, right? And so the idea that you just let the people, like, you just can't do that. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things the military gives you, that the people skills, as bad as it sounds, because some of this behavior we talk about sounds very antisocial.
Yeah, some of it is fairly toxic, but some of it is also like, never thought I'd say this. There's a lot of things I miss about the Army, like the communication. You talk to people, even if you don't like them, you work with them, you talk to them. You're maybe not friends with your acquaintances, and then you leave and you text someone like, "Hey man, how you doing today?" And like 2 days later, they're like, "Oh, sorry, I just saw this." Like,
right.
In the Army, everyone talks very like clearly, concisely. You communicate very clearly. That is one thing I really miss.
Absolutely. So we're gonna pause for a moment because this is a horrible segue, but we're gonna air that beautiful commercial, and then we're gonna get back and we're gonna talk about the books that brought us here. So we're gonna play that
beautiful bean footage.
There we go.
Gunnery Sergeant John Doe is frustrated. He didn't join the Space Corps to be shuttled around in a ship. He joined to fight. So far, he has only seen a few skirmishes. He itches for a fight, something he can use to impress his junior Space Marines, as well as use to pick up chicks. Now that he's aboard the USS Big Stick, he hopes things will be different. The Space Federation has defeated their longtime enemy, and has decided another war was just what the people needed. One was intentional, the other was not. Either way, Gunny is excited. Now Gunny and the rest of the ship's crew must fight for their lives against an enemy none of them saw coming. What could possibly go wrong? Dive into the Vacuum Suck Hard Adventures of the USS Big Stick by J.R. Handley and Chris Winder, and find out for yourself.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude.
Yeah.
That was water. You're good.
The name and everything, that is great.
That actually came with the so we bought that stock art, and because we had the story, we had a different name for it, and the art was so comically 1950s style. I was like, we have to use this art, and then it already had the title on it, Vacuum Sucks Hard. And I'm like, we're incorporating that in. So I actually wrote that one with I was supposed to go to Pew Pew Space Anthology. It was an anthology of short sci-fi humor. But my humor, I know, is barracks humor, and that's an acquired taste for some people.
Yeah.
So I wrote the first 2,000 words, and I sent it to the guy that was publishing it. Was girl. It was MD Cooper, so she was publishing it. I'm like, hey, is this too much? Because if it is, obviously I don't have anything for you. But thanks for thinking of me. Yeah. And she was like, yeah, no, this is a little much from what we were looking for. So I'm like, okay. But then I couldn't get the idea out of my head, so I just finished the novella. So it's like 30,000 words.
Yeah.
And then I went to my friend and former Marine Chris, I'm like, I need you to help me tone the jokes down so it's socially acceptable. You know it's bad when you're getting the Marines to help you tone it down. And then it just sort of went. It was still the most fun. Like, I salute anyone who writes humor, because you have to give like everything is triple and sometimes quadruple meaning.
Yeah,
It's harder to write that
it's
than
hard
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you
my
kind of
next series that I have planned is full of humor. I actually already started. I got about 30K written, and like I really got to think, because like I like to think I'm a pretty funny person in general, like in conversation, but putting that on a page in books and making it actually funny, that is surprisingly difficult.
And writing characters that sometimes say funny things, or putting in humor into a story, is a lot different than writing a humor story. Right?
Yeah,
the distinction.
Yeah,
and
fact,
it's
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I was going to say my book that's coming out soon, The Dragon Riders of Etrea, or I guess it'll be out when this airs. The main character is kind of a, tall, dark, brooding kind of guy, he's going to soften up over the series. That's one of the things. But his sidekick is total comic relief. And that's one of my first times really writing a character that is just not silly, but he's very witty. And he's always like wisecracking and stuff, even in like bad situations. It was a lot of fun to write, actually. And there were some times I'm like, oh, I got the perfect joke. And then there were some times, you write it, backspace. Let me try this again. And, you're trying to work on this one joke for a while, and you realize, like, maybe I just can't put one here. But it's definitely humor, just like in conversation, and humor in a book. Those are different skills. They help each other.
Yeah. And then the temptation is everyone's like, I like this character because they were funny. I want a book just about them. And you realize quickly some of those characters can't hold a book. Like there's just not enough there. Part of why they're funny is because it's one-dimensional.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm going to pull up give me just a second. I'll pull up the cover and we can talk about the art. So you contracted this art. I know you're publishing the audio through Royal Guard, which will be out soon-ish. You never know with Audible about speed of whatever. But so this is the cover.
Yes.
So obviously you've got the girls because this is Harem Lit. So it's, but
that's what sells. Yep.
I like that the dragon and the girl have the same eye color. That's kind of cool. I've never.
Yeah, that's one of the things about the book. All the riders, the dragon riders, and the dragons, they have the same eye colors.
I like the font. It gives it a very medieval feel.
Thank you. I worked a long time on that typography.
I don't know what you call the border scroll thingies. I like the way that looks.
There is a term. I forget it, but.
And you got it up here at the top. I like the details where you went into with the teeth. You can clearly see the heat coming off the dragon snout. And the scales, that detail is just there. Obviously, you got the girl. I mean, we don't need to bemoan that point. Harem Lit is a genre that's romance for men. It is, it is what it is. As far as titles go, it says it all. But one of the things I learned when I started reading, because Heather Hollow, HP Hollow, who writes as Edie Sky for those ones, put me onto it. Some of the plots there are just good. And I was surprised. It's like what I would call summer reading, popcorn reading. Like it's not deep. It's just deep enough that it's fun and you don't have to think, and you can just lose yourself in the story without being preached at, because everybody that's reading it is reading it to escape.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, like, as an author, when I started, that took me a little bit to fully understand. It's not always like, let me write this story and, then I'll make it a harem story. It's like they're generally specific things. They're self-insertion power fantasies. So, your main character is some form of, as we the authors often say, some form of cross between, Conan the Barbarian and James Bond. He'll just have like 4 wives at the end of the series. But it's a lot of the same things. Like James Bond and Conan the Barbarian, they always win. They always get the girl. Conan is known for his indomitable willpower. No one can ever get anything over on him. James Bond, he can do basically anything. He's very crafty. He's got the quick wit. He can get himself out of any situation, usually from the sharpness of his mind, but he can also fist fight. Like, James Bond was often kind of designed to be a quote unquote ultimate man. So I think that is kind of a good blueprint. Just with Harem Lit, there is I think what a lot of people don't expect because it's romance for men, there is a very strong, wholesome streak in there, especially when compared to women's romance, which often is very not wholesome. And I'm not referring to, spicy content. They both have that. But like the men's romance, and like if you don't write it this way, man, your book will get 1 star. They won't read it. Like the readers want to see the main character win over the love interest, like with real genuine romance, treat them well. Like it's things that really appeal to, your core, your lizard brain, so you're winning over these beautiful women that love and trust you and make you feel special. And then you defeat the bad guy through your willpower or your strength or something like that isn't necessarily something you were given. It's something you worked for. It's a lot of those kind of like very deep subconscious kind of male fantasies, like, like you're such a good man that you got 3 women and you beat the bad guy and wow. But it's all very wholesome. Like, in a lot of women's romance, there's a lot of what's the word? Cheating. That is not allowed in Harem Lit. Yeah, are there multiple love interests? Yes, they're always aware of each other. They always approve, which is like just one of the things. There's never any cheating should be under any circumstances. That's like one of the rules as an author. You don't do that because that's not. Why would you do that? What decent good man dreams of cheating on his partner? Like that's not what you do. Yeah, but just surprisingly wholesome.
I read some of the stuff because I went to a romance book con here that was local to me, and it was all steamy romance stuff because I have a friend that was an author there, so I went to hang out because they live in Florida, so I don't normally get to see them. And I'm looking through all this like mafia, cycle club, and it's like with the heart of gold. And I'm like, do you know what those like? Do you know how that works?
Yeah,
it reminded me of when I would watch Jake and the Neverland Pirates with my kids when they were little, and there was this one scene where Jake was like, "We don't steal, we're pirates. That's not what we do." And I'm like, "Actually, yes, that's exactly what we do."
Tells the truth.
Right. And I had to pause that to give my sons lectures on exactly what a pirate was, right? Like,
yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And so when you see that in romance, I just have to chuckle. I'm like, I will not yuck someone else's yum. If this is your escape reading, good for you. Enjoy. But there's a distinct difference. And it's cool to point it out.
I know this mafia boss kidnapped me and chained me in his basement and verbally abused me for 6 months straight. But he loves me. And now I'm pregnant. And that's like the end of the book. I'm like, really? Yeah, that sounded like some random stuff I was pulling out, but that was actually a book that my ex-wife read, and it was a very well-selling book, and that's a very quick synopsis of it.
So the problem with the enemies to lovers is it's really hard to get right, because if you do a good job making them the enemy, you have to do an even better job making them the lover, because like I still hate them. I'm like, you did a really good job making me hate him. He's scum. Okay, now.
Yeah. And a lot of them don't do that. Like they show the guy is horrible, but I don't know. There's like no redeeming factor. He's tall and handsome, like, oh, okay.
And money.
Too, so he can be a bad guy. Yeah. And he's rich, billionaire romance, which always made me laugh because let's be honest, millionaire, that's a lot of money. But no one reads, who wants millionaire romance? Like, what are you, a peasant? No, we do billionaire romance in here. It's kind of funny how that goes. But
even inflation in books.
Sorry, inflation. I can't be millionaire romance anymore. It's got to be billionaire romance.
That's the danger of always kicking it up a notch. Eventually, you run out of notches to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the genre is lighthearted. I don't feel like any of the books I've read have taken themselves very seriously. Like it's very clear what it is from the beginning. They make no bones about it.
Yeah.
Very much,
thing. Yeah. I think I probably have, maybe for better or for worse, written a little bit more like, I guess you would describe it as not so much a harem story. It's a fantasy story with a harem in it. which can be a mistake, honestly, but I think I managed it and it did well. But I definitely put some things in there that some other authors were like, maybe not. And that's kind of like before I, fully internalize like the self-insertion power fantasy thing. Like, what guy wants to, when you read a book, you tend to imagine yourself subconsciously as the main character. It's one of the things why first person is so good, first person point of view. So you don't really want to imagine yourself getting captured by the bad guy, possibly tortured. Even if you break out and stuff, you don't want to do that. Like in a regular book, like, oh wow, this guy overcame crazy odds and then still defeated the bad guy. But like specifically in this genre, like you got to be easy with that stuff. And me coming from cyberpunk, especially gritty cyberpunk, it's like I had to tone it down. I actually took one of my cyberpunk stories and I rewrote it and turned it into a harem story. And it's been a very love or hate story. A lot of people were like, I like dark books. That was the most amazing thing I've ever read. And some people were like, that was depressing. You're a bad person. One of my reviews was like, I hate this book. I hate the author, and I will never read anything by them again. Because it's a dark series, it's truly dark. Not like dark romance. He's a werewolf, but like it's dark. Obviously, I don't want to give it away. And, the good guy always wins in the end, but I really have a bad habit of making him really work for that happy ending. But I'm getting better. I'm getting a lot better at writing what's called slice of life, which I didn't even know was a thing until I started, writing in this and started reading. Jack Bryce wrote the series Country Mage. That was my introduction to slice of life. And that is true slice of life, which is a thing that, you don't do high stakes. It's not the end of the world. It's really just like a day-to-day, what are you doing kind of story, And if this is like a self-insertion kind of thing, you're just imagining yourself as this guy living kind of an awesome life. He's not saving the world. He's just got this really hot girlfriend and like maybe a cool job. And sometimes you don't want to be stressed out by reading about the end of the world. You just want to read a fun, lighthearted story about like a guy with an awesome life. So I'm definitely getting better at writing slice of life. I really like action scenes. I like tense, realistic action scenes, and they always work their way in there. But after this, the next series I'm doing is going to be real big, like slice of life. I have a couple for that. I'm actually splitting my pen name. My current pen name, Micky Carre, is going to stay for the more slice of life, extra spicy stuff. And then, I really enjoy writing a lot of action-based stuff. And my cat's down here. So I'm creating a new pen name, Hans Olsen, which will be for more action-based. Are you going to come up here? You're just going to pester me. Okay. Oh, here's my cat. This is Piper. She's a rescue cat. But Hans Olsen, that's going to be for, I'm going to do a lit RPG book. It's going to be a lot of like action-based stuff, still harem, but the focus is going to be more on, a real action-packed kind of story versus like slice of life, super spicy kind of thing like that. Hi. She got low.
I thought you were going to go with Hans Gruber for a second, and I got excited.
That would be something. Just spell it slightly differently so I don't have to do copyright stuff,
Yeah. Okay, well, that's cool that we got to see all of that in general about your writing. So now let's dive into this. Oh, you are fine. So let's talk specifically about the Dragon Riders of Etrea.
Yes.
So first, what can you tell us? First, why did you pick dragons? Obviously, because
dragons are eternal. So I started writing. I think I mentioned earlier I was writing a Fallout themed, post-apocalyptic slice of life, base building kind of thing. That's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of humor. You are really interested in this laptop, aren't you, kitty cat? And I started writing that, and then I just started like kind of second guessing myself when someone, I think it was Marcus Sloss, he made a comment about dragons because he was doing a dragon series. And I was thinking, man, I should do a dragon series. Like I've never written a dragon book. I had a dragon in my first real trilogy, the New Kingdom trilogy, but it was pretty brief, and he was the bad guy. Actually, my first ever trilogy, which was a trilogy of novellas, the Hero of the North trilogy, that had a dragon in it also. I guess I can't spoil it, but I'm always a big fan of. I don't like, the hero being able to slay the dragon. Like, what's the point of a dragon if one dude can kill it? I like the thought of a dragon that's basically unkillable. So like, you almost like can't fight it. You got to just like find a way to escape it or something, or something else. Sorry, I'm starting to ramble. But actually, that very first trilogy I ever wrote, the Hero of the North trilogy, the world that is in, and then there's a dragon in there, pretty prominently in book 3. It's the same world, the Dragon Riders of Etrea. Etrea is the name of the nation at the very southern end. And there's, I don't want to call it a tie-in, but it happens a month afterwards, and there's a lot of like references to that and everything. And yeah, I decided after a lot of thought, I really went back and forth, and I thought, let me do a dragon story. Let me do a Dragon Rider story. Dragons are eternal. Like, everyone likes dragons. Everyone's always going to like dragons. Dragons are awesome. There's so many different ways you can write them, and they're always cool. Dragons, they're like dinosaurs. Maybe almost literally like dinosaurs. Dragons are awesome. So I just kind of started writing. So I don't really plot my books. I come up with an idea for my main character. For the overall villain, I get like a rough idea of that. Maybe 1 or 2 little ideas, and then I just start writing. That's how I've done every series of mine, except for the Aurora Chronicles, my cyberpunk one. that was a rewrite. Every other series, I don't plot. I just sit down and write. And I found my best writing comes from that. When I plot, I really box myself in. Yeah. You asked me like, why dragons, right? Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to write dragons. Dragons are awesome. I wondered like, how would I write a dragon book?
So what can you tell us about the main character of the Dragon Riders of Etrea?
The main character is loosely based on my love of the early Conan novels from Robert Howard. There was just a style he had. Conan himself is not a good harem lit main character. I mean, he's like always going to brothels, and he really is morally gray. He's not the kind of guy that's going to, help out a homeless person or something like that. Conan would say like, no, you're weak. I'm not helping you. Like, he's fascinating to read about, but he's not a nice guy. But he does have some great qualities that really go well with a heroic character. And so I wanted something kind of like that, but more appropriate for harem lit. And then I really loved how in Joe Abercrombie's first Law trilogy, Logan Nine Fingers turns into the Bloody Nine whenever he like kind of loses his temper and things get too bad. It's almost like a dual personality. He just becomes a completely different person. And, if he gets harmed, it just makes him stronger. And I wanted to kind of take that idea, but make it different. So I didn't say that without, I don't want to give it away because that's like a point. So I have a character that is a big kind of a barbarian thief kind of type. And he does have an issue with a temper that comes up every once in a while. And can't say much about the temper because I think there is a really cool basis of it, source of it, and how in books 2 and 3 he has to deal with that temper, or very bad things will happen to like the entire realm. Let's see, what can I give away? Let's see, what's in the blurb. So yeah, he is the first male dragon rider in 1,000 years. Dragon riders are always women, and they bond with female dragons. Once, a millennium or 2, there's a male dragonborn who is in my Hero of the North trilogy. That was a male dragon. He was very big. He was very cranky, not a nice guy. That is who men bond with. So it's immediately massively problematic. And that's one of his struggles, is to control all that, which is a huge struggle, because if he loses it, then like, everyone is in trouble, because you have this giant, basically immortal dragon that's just going to burn stuff down because he's a crotchety old man.
So is this influenced by your love of the Wheel of Time?
There's always Wheel of Time. Just my style of writing, I have a lot of isms, phrases and stuff that I use. Definitely. I need to like write these down, because there's always like one or two things I put in every book. For a while, I started every single book with a mention of weather or the wind, as a little bit of a throwback to the Wheel of Time. Every book starts with a wind, a breeze blowing. That would eventually, the breeze would make its way around the characters, and the book would start and stuff. But I just had a brain fart.
So
yeah, this is also my first foray into humor. The sidekick is he's a half orc, like a witch man, so like a shaman. So he's a dirty half breed, as he's called, so he's really looked down upon and stuff. So he uses a lot of humor to get around that. And it was a lot of fun writing a humorous character, although I did have concerns that like the sidekick was going to be way more enjoyable than the main character. But my beta readers said it was great. It was great. So I'm not worried about that. But he was a lot of fun to write. Once I really got into that character, it was great.
So what can you tell us about the love interests? I mean, obviously they're probably dragon riders themselves.
They are. It's tough. I don't want to give away too much. So they're women that are chosen by the dragons when they reach a certain age. They have a bond with the dragons, sort of I guess you could think of it as a telepathic bond. I guess, subconsciously that probably does come from the Wheel of Time, because they talk a lot, very similar to the way that Perrin talks to the wolves in the Wheel of Time, like sending emotions and images and kind of scenes.
See that? That's pretty common in Shifter in general. So I don't. So
that they're like partnered with dragons, so they get some magical talents and stuff like that, and typical faster, stronger kind of thing, which is great, because our big, monstrous, burly barbarian main character, suddenly there's like this 5'7" woman, and he's like, oh crap, can't give away much, but
okay. So what can you tell us about the bad guy without spoilers?
Oh, that's going to be tough with spoilers. So in book one, it's kind of a group fight. Yeah, that's going to be tough to not give away. Book one, it's kind of a group fight, a very tense, stressful, dramatic group fight. In book two, yeah, I think I can say it because it's in the blurb. So it's orcs. In book two, they come back for revenge, and it's like an entire orc army. I wonder how he will deal with it. Read and find out. Book three, I think
supposed to say, but wait, there's more.
Yeah. I think it's hinted at pretty strongly. There is going to be a few kind of big fight moments. The main one, there will be some dragon combat, which I'm really excited to write. I'm about halfway through writing book two right now. So I have like pages of notes as I'm writing. If I just think of something, I just open up a new document and Google Docs and just type it real quick and then go back. So I have like just paragraph after paragraph of random stuff and little thoughts and scenes. But there will be some dragon on dragon combat in book three. Super excited to write that. Excuse me. And of course, there has to be, which is funny because I said I don't like this kind of thing. There has to be the main character like taking on a dragon, like one-on-one in some way, shape, or form. There has to be that. Now I'm going to try to do it in a little bit more realistic way, because in the end, he's fighting like a dragon that's like 5 stories tall. Like, this is a really big, not very nice dragon. He's like 1,000 years old, like he's almost like invincible, not fully. That's all I'll say. it's not an easy fight, but of course our main character will find a way, as he will. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to writing that. The love interest with their dragons, they'll be in there, so there should be like a big group dragon fight scene, which will be it's gonna be so chaotic to write. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that.
When you do your
Imagine
combat writing,
pardon?
when you write your combat stuff, do you use the sand tables like the army taught you?
I should. It would make a lot more sense. I actually tend to sketch crap out in Photoshop if I need it for like a big battle. I'll do and I find it really helps. I've actually used a poster board before. It really does help when you have a visual representation of like, here's a wall, here's a berm, here's the bad guy, here's the good guys, here's this, here's that. When you can actually see it, it helps so much to describe it accurately.
Yes. You get things you don't think about.
Yeah.
But like when you do it with the sand table and you're like, oh, there's going to be that hill that's going to impede his vision, or oh, this tree's over here, he's not going to be able to see. That's going to be a blind spot. Like you don't think about that until you're looking at it at a map. Yeah. And that's one of the things where that army training comes in, because I still sand table mine out.
100%. In my first, I still call it my first trilogy because it was my first full-length books, the New Kingdom trilogy, because my first trilogy was novellas. But yeah, the New Kingdom trilogy, the third book, it's been out for over a year, so I can say this. The third book is just like combat, the whole book, basically, starting in like chapter 4 or 5 or something. And I wanted to write a book like that. Like the whole book is like a massive army of like 30,000 people coming in, like truly massive. And our main character has to gather his ragtag group of 1,500 people and somehow defend against that. So that was actually a lot of fun to write, because I really had to think. I had to think on like army training. Okay, how are you going to stand against a greater force? Number one, you shouldn't be fighting a force larger than you. That's just a recipe for disaster. But if you have to, what are things you can do? Obviously, you kind of have to fight dirty, and we've got magic on our side. But it really made me think of a lot of things like that. And I was looking up. I actually have a book, famous like medieval battles and their generals. It's a pretty fascinating book, actually. I was looking up all kinds of like old battles and like just learning, and probably spent like a good 3 days not even writing, because I was just reading about that, and it was pretty fascinating. Yeah, that definitely helped, though. I rambled a bit, but
no, you're fine. So so you've got the love interest.
Yeah.
You don't outline, so you say you just sort of free.
Right. Yep.
I was going to say free ball it, but that's probably not the right expression.
Pants.
There we go. And so when you do that, do you have a definite end state in your head?
Usually. Like right now, I'm on, let's see, I am writing chapter 20 in book 2. It's probably going to be 35, 40 chapters in book 2. Book 3 will probably be like 30 or so. I already know the very last chapter, the kind of happy ending. I know what that's going to be. I've known that since basically when I started writing it, and I was writing the scene. I thought, what would be great? Let me write that real quick. I knew I wanted to have a big dragon battle at the end. I mean, how cool is that? Like a dragon fighting a dragon, and not in like a Hollywood way where they stop and roar at each other. And no, but like actual dragon combat, that would be, I don't know if you've ever seen wild animals fight, but it is horrible. Kind of goes back to our earlier discussion about how awful fighting is. Well, imagine dragons fighting. That's going to be really awful. So that's going to be really interesting to write. That's about all I really knew. And then as I write, the book, I don't want to say it writes itself, but I'm really good about like, I can think up of like an idea. Okay, I'm okay at that, just thinking up of one idea. But if there's already an idea there, I can just come up with stuff, just boom, 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 boom. And so for me, the very first initial thought, that's what takes all of my energy, is thinking of like, okay, I want to do a dragon book with like a barbarian guy and like some comic relief sidekick and this and this and that. Like that took actually a good bit of effort for me to think of just those basic things. But once I had that, it just, I guess the best way to say it is it kind of writes itself. Like, the setting the characters, all that stuff is interesting enough. The just writing some basic interactions, it's like, oh, well, this is clearly what would happen. So I write some notes and yeah.
The danger, though, when you mentioned using like the medieval battles as an example, is sometimes if I wrote reality into a book, they're going to be like, it's unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
So like you could give that beating the larger army, the Battle of Bannockburn, where Robert the Bruce beat the English.
Yeah.
But you write that, I'm like, no way that really happens. I give you a perfect example is if you're watching the nonsense that's going on in Ukraine and Russia. We're apolitical here. We're not talking about the fight. But one of the things that recently happened is Russia and Ukraine are both using drones. The Ukrainians wanted to knock out the Russian drones, so they literally put a stick on a drone and they jousted the Russian drone out of the sky.
That is amazing.
It's hilarious. We're back to sticks, which is kind of funny.
The spear.
Right. But if you write that in a book, everyone's like, no, that's not real.
Yeah.
I had that happen when my first published book, the publisher was like, yeah, JR, that's not believable. I'm like, what are you talking about? This was my experience. Like, I literally stole from my life story for this scene. That's why it's so compelling.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't care. No one will believe it. And I'm like, that's when you realize the line between like reality and then what people will accept as reality in their fiction is a weird line.
Yeah.
It does limit you in ways you don't think about. And you start trying to write.
There has been things on like our Discord server that the authors will talk about. We keep it very politics free. We keep it a very just like kind of place to hang out with nothing controversial. We just talk about books. But several of us have agreed, like when certain things happen or whatever, like, man, I should base a villain off of this politician or that politician. It's like no one would believe it. Like, yeah,
it'd be like two mustaches.
In the news, but then like if you wrote a book, someone doing all this stuff, it's like no one would ever do that. Come on, and it's like, but
yeah, it makes it's interesting, like where that you're not writing in fiction, you're writing an approximation of what reality as we want it to be.
Yeah, I did that with my cyberpunk series, the Aurora Chronicles. I just kind of like watched the news a couple years ago and just kind of extrapolated from like. I try not to be political, like the more kind of what's the word I'm looking for? The politicians that are trying to get catchy headlines instead of actually helping their constituents. I kind of just like extrapolated from some of the crazy crap they're doing and like added 20 years or 50 or 100 years or whatever, and like what direction could this go if like no one stood up to them or if they got in power, kind of thing like that. And I think it helped me to create a bleak cyberpunk world that definitely had an element of realism in it. And then like, as I'm writing it, like some laws were changed and stuff. And like, okay, I didn't want anything in this book to come true. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I've seen
definitely made it more realistic, which maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. God, I hope nothing else in that book comes true. Ugh.
Yeah. It's one of those things though that gives you ideas that you can start if you understand history and just human nature in general.
Oh yeah.
And that comes from just a life lived, observing people, right? Like you do it in any hundreds of ways, but it does make it more interesting. So obviously where you want the story to end.
Yes.
Sometimes it feels like the harem is there to give them some naughty scenes for your perusal, and then there are sort of as an afterthought. Others take it where the romance in those relationships are integral to him being the protagonist, finding the solution, and then together as a team they go forth, conquer, and do great things. Not all of them will give you sort of that epilogue moment at the end where you find out how everyone ended up. So like you go from flying by the seat of your pants because the world is ending around you to, okay, we've solved all that. Now let's, tell them we had a nice life or something. Do you wrap your stories up that way? I prefer it that way. Like, tell me that, they ended up with a picket fence and 3 babies or whatever. Right.
I'm a little half and half. Let me go through my series. So Hero of the North trilogy, there is definitely like after a very, I think it's one of the better like battle scenes I've written with a dragon, with specifically a dragon that no one could hurt. So that was one of the things I liked. The hero literally could not fight the dragon. which made it like all the more terrifying because can't fight. That after all that ends, there is a chapter devoted to like 6 months later, they're rebuilding, they're happy. One of them is pregnant, like a very like they're rebuilding, they're doing very well. Second trilogy, there is an after, like the final chapter is like 1 or 2 days after, so they're still kind of rebuilding, but you see that they're doing okay. Everyone made it, and like they kind of identified like problematic things, like a certain magical item in that book that it's very prominent in that series. They realized that like, man, this is too powerful, we got to get rid of it, but you see the happy ending. I guess you would say you see the beginnings of a very beautiful happy life. Aurora Chronicles, there is definitely a whole chapter where, and that's a rough series. I'd beat that poor guy up. I still think Zeke and Delilah are my 2 favorite characters that I've written. They have a lot of really good interaction, probably because I based half of it off me and my ex-wife. We had a lot of good witty comments and stuff, and so I just put it all in the book. The final chapter in that, they're like on vacation. It's a very nice, well-earned, happy ending. What did I write after that? Goblin Breeder. Still
the
can't.
Goblin ones are a funny trope. I laughed at some of those.
Good Lord. Like, as much as I laugh on it, that's my most successful series. And that series is the reason I was able to quit my job and just write full time. And it started as like this light kind of fluff piece, and it grew into 5 big books and like a surprisingly deep plot. Book 4 is probably the best thing I've ever written. Like, there is so much like deep, dramatic, like just strong things that happen. Great villains and character interactions, character growth. There's all that. The end of that series, there is 5 years after. He's talking to his son, which if anyone reads my books, they will find there is one name that is in, I won't say the name, you got to read. Most of my series have a man's name in them. There is a character by this name. It's my son's name. I like to put him in there. And he's talking to him, and he says just a very like wholesome thing and stuff. Series after that, I did King of the Goblins, which was just like a short thank you to my fans, kind of, because the Goblin Breeder did so well. That actually did not really have that. That had the like, we defeated the bad guy and we're walking back home, and he kind of says something like, hey, let's go enjoy paradise kind of line. Dragon Riders of Etrea will have, let's see, that's not going to have like a 3 years later, how are they doing kind of scene, but it is going to have, I really like really wholesome scenes in the end. That's going to have a super wholesome scene that was maybe foreshadowed in book 1. I don't want to give anything away, but it's going to be a very like satisfying and very wholesome scene. You're gonna be like, oh, that's really nice. Like, just something that's just nice to read, like, wow, that's really great. And kind of like a hero rides off in the sunset with the love interest and everything, and like life is good.
It's the payoff for putting up with all the hard times with the characters, the uncertainty, right? You got to give them that payoff. It doesn't, I mean, like, you could do it however you want to, but there's got to be that, I think, that payoff. I
agree.
It's like G.I. Joe wouldn't be G.I. Joe if you didn't have them laughing at the end, right?
I love those G.I. Joe like infomercials that they redid, and they voiced over and stuff. Oh God, have you seen those?
Yes,
I love them. Pork chop sandwiches. Oh God, it just makes me laugh. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, series after that, who knows? I'll keep that in mind though. I do like that though. An extra chapter just to show that, like, hey, life is good. And like,
Well, the good news is the series that didn't get it, if you do the omnibus version, you can throw that bonus chapter, and then you could also sell it to the people that bought all the individual chapters because it's got that bonus theme they want to hear.
Well, it's only 2 books. Like, King of the Goblins is only 2 books, so no omnibus for that. I was gonna do 3. excuse me. But as I was writing book 2, oh, excuse me again. There just wasn't enough story there. And like the story that I wanted to write and where it was going and stuff, I realized like there wasn't really enough for like 2 more full-length books. So I just kind of crammed them together and made it one proper length book, which I think did it better. Also, that series wasn't as popular for whatever reason. So it got probably my best reviews ever, but it just wasn't as popular. So also I do this for a living. So I got to move on to things that pay my rent, you know. Dragon Riders of Etrea. I do think, I guess we all like to say
he's got to eat, right?
This is one of my best things ever. But I do think there are, I think this is definitely my best attempt at humor. Rasud, the half-orc witchman, is, without boasting, I can say he is honestly hilarious. There's some truly funny scenes in that book. The main character, he's a bit dark and brooding, but I think all of that, I'm the one that wrote it, but that is used to show how his character progresses, because one of the things is, you know, he has to learn how to not be dark and brooding. He has to learn how to control his emotions, and he has to understand what love is, or the entire world will suffer, without giving away anything else.
So would you say that the role of the shaman is almost like a foil to the main character?
He definitely balances him out in a lot of ways. Like Henrik is even early in the book, he mentions it. His diet is like meat and dark beer, very stereotypical machismo stuff. And Rasud is a vegetarian, basically. He doesn't come out and say vegetarian, because I don't even know if they had like the word vegetarian in the medieval times or whatever. But he's always like, oh God, you eat all this stuff. You know, you should eat more like fruits and wine. It's better for digestion. And he's like, oh God, will you stop? But there's always little bits of back and forth, things like that. And it got like, it was really fun to write. And it also makes me think about food more, because like medieval food was very different than a lot of people think it was. Half of it was bread, the other half was stew. You know, meat was very expensive. So I was
going to say the person that you'd call a vegetarian in those days, we'd call them peasant or poor.
Yeah. If you're rich, you ate like meat and sweets, you know, because those were expensive. Refined sugar was expensive. So if you were poor, you ate a lot of, you know, very rich bread. Sometimes the bread even had ground like bean flour in it. If it was really crude, they actually called it horse bread, because they would feed it to their horses. But I mean, it was very nutritious bread. That was their meal. And then they would have like stew, you know, eggs for breakfast. Quite often you didn't eat the chicken. Why would you eat the chicken? The chicken's going to give you eggs for like the next 3 years, you know, or honestly, I don't know how long chickens lay eggs, but for X amount of time. Yeah, meat is expensive. You got to have room for the animals. So potatoes were not a thing in medieval Europe. They were not a thing at all. They ate radishes.
They did have tubers.
Yes. Radishes and, you know, carrot. Did they have carrots? I think they had carrots. Yeah.
Yes.
But it was, I found a fascinating list online, and it was like the foods and what year they became like a staple. And, you know, rice is like way back there, like 5,000 BC, people have been eating rice. And then you get potatoes is like,
it's not just the food, it's also the spices. So like I have a peppercorn like kernels that I throw in my soup. I throw 8 of them in a crock pot to make my chicken soup. Like 8 of them was probably like I could, you know, ransom a night with 8 of those corns, because I mean it was just that valuable, right?
You think about the labor to get like herbs like that, like that's all manual labor. That's a lot of work, you know.
Yeah, so it's that's one of the things people don't think about. Are you familiar with the channel Tasting History?
Someone told me about that the other day.
He was a former Imagineer for Disney, and his YouTube channel took off, and he was able to make that his full-time job. He's not a classically trained cook. He just loves history and he loves cooking. Yeah. So he decided to start, you know, This is where the journey started. I wonder what they ate, what it tasted like. So then he started finding recipes and just recreating to the best of our ability with modern ingredients, all these ancient recipes, cooking them the way they would have. And he's got videos on just about anything from Roman fish sauce, the garum, which just looks disgusting, but they loved it, to, you know, medieval foods and desserts and the breads. And it's very fascinating to watch kind of how they did it. And he even did the Ozempic man, Utsi man that they found in the Alps. Ozempic is the medicine that you see on the news all the time. But the Utsi man, he like tracked down what was in the guy's diet in his digestion because he found his mummified corpses in the Alps.
That was like the frozen dude, right?
Yeah. And he recreated his last meal.
Mm-hmm.
And just like all of that stuff was kind of just, it's cool to watch. So if you're ever studying like what people would have eaten in an era, I send everybody to that channel. It is entertaining. That
does sound neat. Another thing that helped me a bit was that, I mean, it's, you know, it's a little bit romanticized, Hollywoodified, if that's a word. What's that show? Forged in Fire.
Yes.
That is good because you can watch that guy use the weapons at the end, and you can see how you would attack with that weapon, and you can see what it will do. Like the first story I ever wrote, which I'm slowly redoing, which will be in the same world as Dragon Riders of Etrea and the Hero of the North trilogy, but it will predate them both by 2 months or so. And it's going to be, I think, just a mono romance. But it'll be kind of slightly grimdark-ish fantasy. Maybe not full grimdark, but a little gritty. It's definitely a little gritty. There is a scene where he chops off a dude's head with a rapier. And my editor kicked that back. Like the only time I've ever used an editor. I don't use an editor, by the way. I grew up super poor, so the thought of spending money on anything is like horrible to me. Like, why do we have to eat? Didn't we eat yesterday? Like, I don't even want to spend money on food. I have a very poor mentality. So like, I do everything myself. But she said, you can't cut someone's head off with a rapier. Like, they're poking weapons. And so I sent her, I mean, like a fencing rapier. Yeah. Fencing foil. Yeah. Poke. But like rapiers were, I mean, the blade was, 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches wide, and they were long as hell. They were made primarily for poking and slicing. And for dueling, but I sent her a link to, it was like a Musketeers, Three Musketeers style rapier, I believe, in Forged in Fire, where there's an entire pig carcass, and he just like 2 chops goes like all the way through the spine and everything, like devastating.
And so the other thing is, you have to assume if we're messing with their ancient weapons, this is why Hima's making a comeback. They've got Hama, historic African martial arts, where they're doing some of the stick fighting from the manuals. If you can make the human body do it and the weapon can be used that way, as creative as you think you are, they probably thought of it too because they used it every day. So the idea that, they wouldn't use it that way, if the human body lets it and it worked, you can assume they did too.
Yeah.
And that's where people just the assumption that people in the past were stupid.
Yeah, they were very crafty. I mean, they didn't have the things that we do now, but they were very crafty. Yeah, medieval life is interesting to read about. It's a lot different than you think. You think everyone is filthy and they bathe once a year and this and this and that, and they work themselves to death all the time. I mean, yeah, you didn't live as long. You didn't have, hospitals or penicillin. But I mean, they took more vacation time than we do. Like they had like 3 times the average vacation time as the average American, and yeah, they worked for their food and then they relaxed, and they had not a lot of meat, but a surprisingly rich diet, all kinds of, like you said, tubers, fruits, vegetables, eggs, all kinds of stuff like that, all kinds of different grains. I mean, yeah, they also like drank beer for every meal, but I mean, they peed in their water. So
yeah,
got to keep it safe. And their beer was only like 2.5%, 3%. It was very weak.
Just enough fermented alcohol to make it not poisonous, basically.
Yeah. And the boiling process, that sterilizes everything. So, but yeah, they were like just drinking from sunup to sundown, but it was very weak things. I've actually had a beer kind of like the medieval ones they do not taste like our beers. First off, they usually don't use any hops. If I remember correctly, I might have this backwards. Ale had hops, beer did not. Beer was very malty. But I've had like a 3%, beer that was made kind of in that style, and it was pretty good, but it did not taste anything like what you would when you think of beer. It doesn't taste like that. It's like this very light malty, flat, almost like a tea kind of. I don't know how to describe it. It was good. I would drink it on the regular.
For one for calories, absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. Calories. That was a valuable source of calories all the way back to Egyptian times. Their beer was like, they actually used beer for currency. The workers that built the pyramids, true story, pyramids were not built by slaves. I say this as a Jewish person. The Jews did not build the slaves. Sorry, Jews did not build the slaves. The Jews did not build the pyramids. They were not slaves that built the pyramids. They were valued workers that built the pyramids, and they were paid with beer. Beer was money in Egyptian times. There's a fascinating documentary called, if I remember correctly, it's called How Beer Saved the World. And it goes over the history of beer, like from the very first one, how it was like accidentally fermented, in a rainstorm, like 10,000 BC or something. It's absolutely fascinating. It shows how much of society literally evolved around beer or because of beer or involving beer. It's incredible. But yeah, Egyptian beer, they drank it out of a bowl, and like it still had all the grains in it. It was like oatmeal, and they used like a straw made out of reeds and would just sip it. But it also, that really helped them because they would put herbs in it and stuff. And it had, what's the tetracycline, I think, the antibiotic. It had like naturally occurring tetracycline in it, which they found in Egyptian people, mummified Egyptian people, like on their bones. It kept them healthy. It was a very valuable source of nutrition back then. And, the alcohol was like ridiculously low, like 2%. They didn't have the yeast strains that we do now. They had like, hey man, whatever wild yeast is on the grains, we're going to use that.
Well, we've also, people forget, like, if you hear your grandmother talk about the tomatoes she would eat off the vine when she was a kid, and then you eat a tomato off the vine, it's not the same thing. Yeah. So partly in an effort to, genetically modify them just through selective breeding to make them bigger, plumper, prettier, whatever,
ripen
we
faster.
lost some of, and grow them faster. We lost some of the nutritional density. So you're eating more and getting the same calories. You're not actually getting any more. And so if you want to like this came up when they found George Washington's hard apple cider recipe. They actually had to biologically reverse engineer apples to what they would have tasted like when he was alive to then recreate his recipe by guessing, because he didn't write, he wrote, these are the ingredients. He didn't write the measurements down.
Huh.
Because I guess he just cooked with his heart.
I bet, I hate to say this because I do like apples, but I like modern apples. I like, Pink Lady apples. Those are really good if you can find them. Everyone likes Fuji apples, all those. Like 300 years ago apples, they probably weren't that good. I'm immediately thinking of like the Red Delicious apple, which was not around in the 1700s. That is actually a more modern one. I think it was like early 1900s or something. Red Delicious apples, which
I remember eating crab apples off the tree when we were outside playing as a kid.
Shocking. That's the only word for that. You take a bite and you're like, holy crap. I was not expecting that.
I mean, it's an acquired taste, but
yeah.
So, all right. Well, we've been jaw jabbering for a little bit, and I'm having fun. Me too. So this is dangerous. But if we keep going, neither one of us will get sleep or finish our words for the day. So, how can listeners and viewers at home find you?
You can just search me on Amazon. Probably the easiest way. All my books are on Amazon. Micky Carre. There's no E. Micky. I almost said E when I said that.
You almost did the Disney version.
Yeah, I know. I was totally doing that. You can just search for that, and hopefully in a few months you can look up Hans Olsen. I'll post it on all of my socials when I do that. And again, that's still going to be me. That's just going to be my more adventurous books, versus Micky Carre is going to be more like slice of life and extra spicy, because I've learned that's what people really like about my pen name. Yeah, just find me there. I've got a Patreon where I post all of my stuff as I write it. I usually do a chapter a day, 7 days a week. Sometimes, especially if my timing's off, I'll do 2 chapters a day, 3 chapters a day, make sure I get it out before the book comes out. So you can read the story as I'm writing it, and you can read it before it comes out. All my audiobooks, Royal Guard handles my audiobooks, so they're usually just like on Amazon. You can click right there. I've got a Facebook account, a Facebook page. I try to post on there regularly, and I'm trying to post more like not just book stuff, but just like talk to people and just like post, because I'm not really on social media. I was, I had like 5,000 Facebook friends, and everything. And a few years ago, I was like, this is dumb. I don't know any of these people, and I'm getting ready to like post pictures of my newborn son. No, I don't like this. So I pretty much pulled myself off of social media. I have social media for me as an author, and that's it.
Same. But I remember when Tom was my first friend over on MySpace.
Yeah.
And I'd go back to the simplicity of it. But at this point, like, I wouldn't be on social media if I weren't writing.
Yeah. I've really, it's very convenient because like I can keep in touch with some of my army buddies and stuff like that, Why are you meowing so loudly? But also I feel like it brings out a pretty negative aspect of society, and it's kind of like almost like a weird social evolution, where like, I'm sure you remember like memorizing phone numbers,
yes,
buddy after school, and just talking. And the phone still had the curly cable on it. It wasn't even wireless, and it's there in like the living room, and your parents are watching TV, and you got like a girl on there, and you're trying to flirt, so you're like whispering really quietly, like, I like you, do you like me? Making sure your parents don't hear, like stuff like that. Like, we don't do that anymore. We like send someone a Facebook message, and then they get back to you the next day, and it's like, man, I miss old friends and old friendship things, especially with COVID. Like, things have changed a lot with COVID, our social skills and stuff. I mean, necessarily it was like, God, it killed like 1.2 million people in this country, but like it did have a lasting effect. Like I was talking to a kid that I worked with at my last job where I was doing IT. Like, he never went to high school prom. His 11th and 12th grade years, like, what was it? Yeah, like he was at school online. He never had a prom. And I was thinking, man, I mean, prom is like, looking back, it's dumb, but still, like, man, he never did prom, did all this stuff. Like, that kind of sucks. And it's really changed how we interact with people, I've noticed.
It's a rite of passage where we make bad life decisions, and sometimes we learn to overcome our fear of ladies to ask them on dates.
Yep.
But yeah, it's a different world. Some of it's like,
it is.
When you go to we have a Chinese buffet where people wear the gloves now when you grab your food. Like, I don't know why we weren't always doing that. Like that, yeah. I like. Some of it, not so much. Like, it's a mixed bag, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and there's even been like actual scientific research done on Instagram and how it affects, especially like young teenage girls. It really, really negatively affects their sense of self-worth and their self-image and their self-esteem. Like, it's bad. But then, like, if you were to get rid of all social media, like, good Lord, what would happen? Like, we can't do that. It's such a part of society now. Sometimes I wonder, like, what's social media going to be like in 20 years? I honestly have no idea, but I imagine Facebook will still be around. It's already been around like 20 years. So
it's crazy to think about. This is the part of the interview, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part, click the stars, write a review, tell why you loved it. Sometimes even a bad review can sell a book. I know I've bought books because they said, this soldier cusses too much. And I'm like, sign me up.
And if it's a bad review, say why. Don't say, I hated the book. Say, this character did this. I didn't like it. The book was like this. I did not like that. Please fix that in your next book. Do that. And you know what? We'll read it and we'll fix it.
Or just disagree with you, which is also possible, because sometimes not all, like I said, not all books are for all readers, but it's tweaking the algorithm so they know who to send the book to next time.
Yes.
Which is equally as valuable. And with that, you can
really do genuinely help independent authors like me. So yeah, please, if you read a book, if you like it, rate it.
And if you want to talk about the harem lit genre, they have a pop-in Discords, and they're very active on Reddit.
Yes.
So,
and we have a wonderful guy that moderates the Reddit, so you never really get like spam or anything like that. He's great. He moderates the Discord and one of the Facebook things. He moderates like everything, and he works really surprisingly hard. Just like as a passion project, he likes the genre, he likes the authors and stuff, so he moderates like all the stuff. It's
nice.
Great. Yeah.
I didn't know it was all one person. And speaking of where you can find us, dear listener, you can find us on our link tree at linktr.ee, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things: the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, for professional purposes only, people. We have our Facebook group and Facebook page. And more importantly, we have Madam Stabby Stab on the Instagram, Twitter, and email, where you can send all the shenanigans and hate mail to her. She's here for it. We link to our Spotify website on the link tree, where you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month. You can help keep the lights on. These episodes aren't free to produce, and we appreciate your patronage. You can support the show more directly over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee until I was going to say pour out of their eyeballs, but we've done that before. I'll come up with something new next time, I promise. But Coffee Brand Coffee, links in the show notes, discount code podcast grunts, 10% off. American company, you're supporting American workers, and it's good, which helps. So you can help us there as well. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom.
Read more books.
Mickey, this was fun.
It was. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
All right. And with that, I'll hit the end button.